Congratulations, Jamaica. You are truly a trailblazer, and engagement with community is really a humongous piece of the work that we need to do for energy transition and climate. Thank you so much, and congratulations again. My name is Judy Chang. I am the moderator for the next panel. So if we can bring our panelists up, that would be great. And while we do that, let me just give you a brief introduction. I currently serve as a lecturer at Harvard Kennedy School. I've been a senior fellow there for over a year, and prior to that, I was in the state government in Massachusetts as an undersecretary in energy and climate solutions. And what's really interesting in my journey over the last few years is that now I get to talk about the things that I've learned over the decades and then bring them to a point where how do other people get to learn this and understand it and are really absorbing it, which is interesting. I know a lot of folks in the room here are from academia, and my hat off to you because this is absolutely hard work. As Jamaica said, there's a lot of hard work in this space, and one of the things about teaching is this is really hard work. It's one thing to stand up here and say all the things I want you to know, I want you to see, and I want you to hear. It's another thing to actually go into a classroom and understand how the students might think, what they will learn. And Harvard has drilled this to me, inside me, which is great. I really appreciate it. It's not what we teach. It's what they learn. It's what students actually learn. That's what actually matters, not what we say. So want to transition and definitely introduce this great panel. I am so honored to moderate this, and I won't speak too much except to just introduce that. How do we increase the momentum of the energy transition? How do we have durable policies and sustain those policies over time to make sure that we really push the ball forward or bring the ball forward and really make a difference? And I also have the honor, sort of taking a little time to join the academia. I also have some time to think about some of these bigger questions. And I'm honored to actually co-authoring a book chapter about regulating the power sector in the future. So what does the future of the power sector and the regulating power sector will be? And as I think through this, I'm actually thinking, well, is it really moving the ball forward incrementally? Because we're all working on that. We're going to talk about how we work on that. But also, I want to challenge, this panel and this discussion, this conference today is maybe we don't just move it incrementally. Maybe we actually need some step changes. Because I'm like doing the calculations in my head to get to net zero in 2050. I'm not sure moving the ball incrementally forward is enough, right? So bringing it back to this panel, I want to first thank this great panel, but we want to talk about how to keep policies on a sustainable path, on a durable path. So with that, I want to first just introduce our esteemed panelists. And first, we're going to have Paula. Paula's going to talk to us about the importance of energy efficiency, continued importance of energy efficiency. Then we have Peggy. Peggy comes from Texas. She's on the board of ERCOT, and we know that ERCOT has been a space where, we might not talk about this, but people in the energy space definitely know this. It's at the forefront of renewable energy development, right? Probably more wind and maybe now solar, but wind development across Texas. And what does that look like? What is market forces and policy? How do they intersect? And then we have Chief Hoffer. Melissa Hoffer is our Chief Climate in Massachusetts, and she will talk to us about how state policies can be sustained over time and what are the resources that will be needed. So with that, Paula, I will join you on the couches there so that you can choose to speak there or come up here. It's up to you.
I'm going to stand because I just need to.
Okay, excellent. This up here.
Like that. Good afternoon, you guys. Oh, everyone sounds like me. So my name is Paula Glover. I'm the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. I want to, one, congratulate your award winners and really say to you, Gina, thank you for listing all of your mentees and mentors. This has been an awful day, and I needed to hear that so that I remembered all those queens whose shoulders I stand on. So I really, really do appreciate that. I will also tell you, I spent 20 plus years in Connecticut. Very few people knew who John Rowland was. When you said Jody Rell, I was like, ooh, she was there for the bad years, right? You know that, the year of everybody going to jail in Connecticut. We had quite a few in 1 year, if you recall. And so I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk to you guys about policy. And I describe policy as the intersection of everything. It is the intersection of everything that we do. Policy is at that intersection. And I challenge us, when we think about clean energy and policy, we need to think about the intersection of everything, because everything is connected in a way that we haven't thought about it before. I'll give you an example. We talk a lot about in energy efficiency, about technology. At the Alliance, we describe that as active efficiency. You may call it demand response, virtual power plants, right, interacting with your grid. But we also need access to broadband. And if we start to think about equity and justice and energy, we actually have to now consider broadband, because those two things go together. No access to broadband, the other stuff does not happen. And we remember that we're talking about energy and justice because we have so many communities that have been left behind. So you know that we have communities like that across the country. I would also suggest, though, that policy is circular. We have some things that we put in because we have an outcome that we want to come out. And I'm going to just stick with it. We at the Alliance think a lot about the outcomes, a lot about the outcomes. It doesn't even matter what the inputs are. There are lots of great policies. We could not be happier about all of the investments that are being happening in clean energy and energy efficiency, whether that's through the IRA, whether that's through Build Back, whether that's actually through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is the thing that we're most excited about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. But if we're not paying attention to the outcomes, the inputs actually do not matter. And so if you leave nothing from this conversation, it is that policy is not only the intersection of everything. It is every day, all the time, paying attention, every day, all the time, paying attention. Because consider, if you will, if this money that we are investing is misspent, and we're waiting till 2030 to figure out whether or not what happened to it, we have lost the game. So at the Alliance, we have a program called Energy 2040. That is where we list our policy initiatives, but also it is our double check. Every year or two, we go back and we say, okay, we advocated for tax incentives for heat pumps. Are we seeing a greater adoption of people with heat pumps? If we see a great adoption of people with heat pumps, is it successful? Is there something missing? Is there something else that we need? We've advocated for tax credits for people to buy particular technology. What happens to taxpayers who don't optimize their taxes? Is there something else that we need to be doing to get people to adopt technology? The same would be, though, for all of the great things and the outcomes that I think this transition is going to give us. We talk often about workforce. All of the opportunities in workforce. Just in the state of New Jersey this year, their first year reporting on their Clean Energy Jobs program that was specifically designed to create workforce opportunities for folks in low-income communities. The goal was 2,000. They hit 2,100, 2,200 in the first year. They're expecting to hire another 41,000 people by 2030 in the state of New Jersey. So this can be big, but that means big dollars, big risk, big success, enormous failures. So we have to be paying attention to policy all the time. What's going in, but what's coming out? What are the outcomes that we want to see come out of that? And then the last thing I would just say is we have got to stay focused on community. Community are the ones who are getting to make these kinds of decisions. I really appreciated your comments, because what we struggle with oftentimes, right, is how do we get people to love us? That's actually not our job. Our job is to give them the most accurate, honest information that we can and encourage them to get more, so that they understand what's going on in their own place and what they want in their own place so that they can make their decisions. But our job is to give them that information as accurately as we possibly can, as honestly as we possibly can. That is very hard, I will tell you sometimes, but that is what we need to do. And then we need to be ready for community to either wrap us up in a hug or say, something else is my priority. And something else is my priority does not mean I don't love you. It means something else is my priority. And so when we're thinking about disadvantaged communities and all the opportunities, workforce opportunities, small business opportunities, efficiency has the ability to upgrading a building is about building a community. Upgrading a building is not about upgrading a building. Upgrading a building is about building a community. Anyone who's been to a dilapidated community where they have very poor businesses, no business, no infrastructure, take a look at those buildings. And anybody who's worked in economic development, as I have, will tell you that I sell the infrastructure when I'm selling my state. I sell the workforce when I sell my state. I point people to the cities that have the best infrastructure, low prices, low rates on your utilities. We got high-speed internet. All these are the things that we sell. And so as we're thinking about buildings and efficiency in the work that we do, we need to think about it in terms of the people that it impacts. And that's who policymakers care about. And that's why we care about policy, and we pay attention to it every day, all the time. So I would say we got great wins 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year. And we have a lot of rules, and we are not even there yet. And I don't know what more we need, but I do know that we need more. And I do know that if we're not paying attention every day, all the time, over and over, looking at those inputs and looking at those outcomes and being prepared to pivot when it does not reflect what we want, and talking to the people who do not want to talk to us, that is how we're going to get there. And I thank you. I think I'm at 37 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is such an inspirational group. I'm going to apologize in advance because of my topic, which is grid operations, but it is so critical to what we're trying to do here. And so I have got some slides with some facts. I only have 5 slides, but there's a lot of facts in them. And so my goal here is to get you to focus on some of the data and think about these issues and get you excited about helping us solve some of the grid problems that we're facing in the U.S. with the transition. So for those of you that don't know, ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas, what we do is we manage the flow of power across the state. We also manage or financially settle the financial markets in Texas related to power. We have this is an important point when we talk about renewables, and it was referred to earlier. We have what's called an energy-only market. That's a term that people don't really understand. Some people call it a competitive market. Some people call it an unregulated market. It's probably none of the above, but those are names that you might hear. But what it means is that we don't pay generators in Texas to be on standby for peak demands. That's unusual in the U.S. There's a lot of different complex markets across the U.S., but we don't pay people to be there for those peak days. Generators in Texas make their money when it's affordable. Their power will always clear the market the way our market's designed. And so what that has resulted in is we are the leader in solar and wind in the United States. We have more solar and wind than any other state. EIA projects that in 2023 that we will have more solar and wind added into our state than all other states combined. And think about that. That's pretty amazing statistics. And it's partially due to the market design that we have that encourages investment. But it's also encouraged by we've got a lot of land. It's a big state. And we embrace business in Texas and technology and just creativeness. And there's a lot of that going on. So what I want to just point out a few things here that are important when you think about what we've done in Texas, the challenges we face, and what can be done in other states. If you look on the bar on the left-hand side, the year 2000, 97% of our power in Texas was traditional thermal dispatchable generation. In 23 years, the bar on the right-hand side, that's about 50%. That's a big reduction, with the bulk being wind, solar, and batteries. You're probably thinking this is great news, and it is great news, probably compared to any other state in the U.S., what we've done. And I'm not taking credit for it, but these are the facts. It's great news. We want more wind, we want more solar, we want more batteries. We need everything because this dynamic of this shift is creating some real problems with our operations of the grid and moving power around the grid to where the demand is. And I've got a slide later on that I'll share with you that just kind of tries to illustrate the complexities of operating a grid when you move to more intermittent resources like wind and solar. And when I say intermittent, it's not a derogatory term at all. It's just the way they're designed. Those generators are designed to run when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing, and they have saved our butt this summer. So it's not, I'm not trying to be negative on that at all. We need more, but we also have a problem that when the sun isn't shining, and this is a particular problem that we're going to face in the winter and other grids are going to face in the U.S. And if you read some of the literatures and some of the information that's come out looking at other grids, we probably are a little bit ahead of the challenges, but these challenges exist across the U.S. Now, the bottom half of the chart shows our all-time peak demand, and this is amazing. In the year 2000, same period, our all-time peak demand, the day with the biggest demand was 57,606 megawatts. In 2023, it was 85,435 megawatts, a 45% increase, which is huge. And just a little more wonky, we have set in the last 2 summers 20 all-time peak demands. And just this year over last year, the peak demand increase is 5,000 megawatts higher than last year. That's a 14% increase. That's huge to manage. If you look at energy growth from the EIA, the U.S. usually averages about, on average, year over year, a 1% increase. We've had a 14% increase in the last year in peak demand. This shows the data a little bit differently, but it really shows to me the challenges that we have in managing the intermittent renewables. So if you look at the chart on the left, this shows you in ERCOT from the year 2000 to 2008. So where probably that first peak in the green line is. We added 20,000 megawatts of natural gas capacity, dispatchable gas capacity. From the year 2008 to today, we've added 48,000 megawatts of capacity, almost all wind, solar, and batteries, and no thermal dispatchable capacity. This is, I'm sure it looks like great news, and it is great news. But we have a problem. We have a problem when the sun isn't shining, especially in the winters, which is a new phenomenon for Texas. You know, we were always, the summers were the peak because it's so hot. Well, now with relying more and more on solar, when the sun goes down, that's when it's getting colder, and before the solar comes on the next morning, that's the peak time. And so we have a problem managing that. It's a very real problem. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to manage that. We're welcoming more solar, more wind, every technology that the smart people in this room are looking at. We welcome that. But we have concluded that to get through the transition that we're going to need more natural gas generations to be a backup for the intermittent nature of the wind and solar. It will be used far less than it is today. That's a great thing, but it's needed because I personally lived through Winter Storm Uri, where we had, the numbers are debatable, several hundred people die in the code because we didn't have electricity for 4 or 5 days. The backlash, if people don't have affordable, reliable power, is going to be huge. I know, I've lived the backlash in Texas, and I think it would be far worse anywhere else. Just people don't want to think that their electricity, they don't want to think about their electricity. They want it to be there. And when it's not there, it's a problem, and it could have significant backlash. So these are problems that the whole country are facing and other ISOs, independent system operators. I encourage you guys to focus on this because I don't think enough attention has been paid to the problem with the grid. And people know the problem's there, but what do we do to solve it? In this final slide, I'm not going to go through it, but this just is an attempt to depict the differences and the challenges for operating a grid now compared to, 20, 30 years ago, where we've got virtual power plants, we got wind that's, 500 miles away from the demand, and all the new technologies, which are great, but it makes it more difficult to keep the grids in balance. So thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to start by, I think we have Diana J. in here. Are you still here? If you are here, if you could raise your hand. I just wanted to give a shout out. Diana was a Rappaport Fellow with our office, was a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, and was an incredible contributor to work of our office in its inaugural year, and is a true example of a young woman leader who will be playing an incredible role as we continue to do the work that we're all doing together. I just want to give a shout out to my Chief of Staff, TJ Flaherty, who's in the back there as well. So it's a delight to be here today with everybody. And as we're talking about policy durability, there were two things I wanted to focus on in my introductory remarks, although I'm salivating to get back into this debate about power grids and market design. So we'll put a hold on that one for now. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is governance innovation. And we have sitting in the front row here, of course, Gina McCarthy, who led the first domestic Office of Climate Policy in the Biden administration. So, that idea, that whole of government approach is what we're trying to do here at the state level. And that is because climate change touches on everything. So it's a national security issue. You've heard the Pentagon described it as a threat multiplier. That's not just because of the impacts of climate change, because climate change itself is causing instability internationally. And so it is something that is actually creating conflict and will continue to do that, water scarcity, food scarcity, and things like that. We know it affects transportation, housing, public health is a huge issue. Folks in here probably have been paying attention to the impacts of the Canadian fires this summer on air quality here. So we know at least New York, and we're sharing some of these data with other states, have seen some peaks in hospital admissions during those times. So it's a key public health threat, and obviously just the impacts of the flooding that we've seen, the mold that can ensue after events like that, and the mental health impacts. I would just pause for a moment and share conversations that I've had with folks at MGH this summer who came to do a presentation to our office and showed us a graph of, these are adolescent suicidality, hospitalizations, et cetera. And so it's the graph that you would expect where, you see the, the line really spike in 2020 with the pandemic, and then it doesn't really tail off the way that you might expect. So one of the reasons for that is they're seeing a lot of depression and anxiety show up in these young people because of climate change. So it's something that they're really worried about. Melissa Middleman, I want to give a shout out as well, another young leader from our office here today, Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, but heard a presentation from these doctors when they came in to speak with us. So it's got health impacts as well, and when we know it kind of touches on everything. So in the past, dealing with climate change has largely been, within the purview of our environmental agencies. So that would be EPA and the energy agencies like FERC or here, DEP or the DPU. So that's just too much climate change for too few people. And it also means, those agencies don't necessarily have the jurisdiction or the authority to take action in some places where it really needs to be taken. So what you need to have is somebody who is going to be driving that, a president in the case of President Biden, or a governor in the case of Governor Healy, who is saying, this is my person. And this person is going to sit, and I'll just give you an example. You can imagine feeling like a skunk at the party, but in our first capital investment planning process this year, I attended all those agency meetings. So when people were talking about, that's where we're going to talk about spending money to build things or buy stuff. Well, we want to buy a new vehicle. Okay, great. Is that going to be an electric vehicle? No. Okay, well, why not? So those kinds of conversations happening are really important. And that was pretty ad hoc our first time through this year, but that process is now going to be formalized, and we're just going to keep getting better at that. So that, first climate chief, definitely not the last climate chief. And I think you're going to see that role very much like we've seen corporate sustainability officers. You're going to see that in the C-suites. You're going to see it across government. I've spoken to many local governments. I think you're going to see it in those situations as well, because it just does, to get back to, to your point, Judy, it's really intersectional. And so the response to it also has to be intersectional. And that means bringing in lots of different kinds of expertise and also some generalists who can think about, okay, humanities majors, yay. We know how to think about these big picture, I'm probably the only one in here, please put up with it for a little bit longer, the systems thinking stuff. And that's what's really important about it. So I wanted to talk about that kind of innovation, and it also means that those people then own it. So when we put Executive Order 604 into place, the way that it works is it's not just the climate office, because that would be, we don't have enough people for that. We have Secretariat climate officers designated in each of the agencies. And so those are folks who have experience with their agency's mission. They're deep experts on housing or transportation or what have you. And they also have an interest or an aptitude for climate. And so they're the people who are driving climate and working directly with the secretaries to do that. So that's one of the sort of governance innovation that I wanted to talk to you about. And then briefly, I just wanted to talk on financing innovation. Because you might think, okay, Massachusetts, back in 2008, we passed one of the first strongest global warming solutions acts. It was one of a handful of similar acts at that time, economy-wide, greenhouse gas emission reductions. We have the Green Communities Act. We have RGGI. We have very far-reaching, excellent, world-leading, in the case of RGGI, programs. But we are at risk of not meeting our 2030 goals. We have a Baker administration leading by example executive order that is a model for how states themselves should go about their efforts to decarbonize, but we haven't gotten there yet. So spending the first 6 months at the direction of the governor to figure out what's working, what can we lift up, Where are our gaps, sort of what are the trends and barriers? Of course, you all guess, right? What's the answer? Well, okay, how come we haven't decarbonized, our UMass campuses? Anybody have a guess? Right? Money. We don't have the money for this stuff. So it all comes back to that. And if we can't marry our budget to what our clean energy and climate plan goals are, they're not going to get done. So that's what we're working on now. It's a big reason behind why we started our Massachusetts Community Climate Bank. We really wanted to focus on we have a huge focus on decarbonizing buildings, obviously, but we really wanted to focus on affordable housing because that's really important. We also have a huge focus on energy and environmental justice. And that happens to be a very tough nut to crack because it's the very space where private lenders might be a bit reticent to come in because they're concerned about the creditworthiness of those loans. But with a climate bank in place, and that initial capitalization of $50 million, we are hoping will attract some significant co-investment from whoever is the recipient of the greenhouse gas funds that are coming from EPA soon. We're going to be able to do things like reassure lenders. We can do loan loss reserves. We'll make you whole if there is a problem. We can do things like interest rate buy downs. So that's the kind of thing that a state can step in and do. And let me tell you why. Some people in here will remember Hamburger Helper. I love this analogy. The governor loves it. Other people hate it. But I think of it like that because the Connecticut Green Bank now has a leverage ratio of 7-to-1. And that means for every dollar that Connecticut is putting in the pot, they're getting $7 from private investment to come in and do stuff. And it's a bank. So like you lend money, but then you get it back, and you get it back with a little bit of a rate of return. So actually it's much better than a grant program. And I'm not saying that we're not going to stop doing grants, because we won't. And we just did a $50 million grant for affordable housing decarb as well. But the really good thing about using these kinds of banking techniques is that you do get more out of the money because you bring some of that private money off the sidelines and then you get paid back. So things like that. And the next thing we're going to be doing is really doing an analysis. We've never done an analysis of what is the total investment needed to meet our 2050 net zero goals. We don't know. We need to figure it out because we don't know what it is. And it's lots of players, right? It's us, but then we also have to think about some of the things we want to have happen aren't in the control of the state. We want people to buy a lot of EVs. Well, we do pay a rebate for that. We match that with a $7,500 federal tax credit. It's something like $11,000 altogether. That's pretty good. But that money doesn't necessarily all come from us. So we need to figure out what is the total cost, who pays it, and how can we help finance that? That's a really big step for us, and we're going to do the same for resilience. Thanks.
Well, I have the pleasure of blending all of these climate topics into one conversation. I want to maybe just start, since Melissa, you said you were itching to talk about this, so I'm
Great.
Different states have different policies, but also different priorities and different methods. And one of the things that you can probably hear from this conversation is that Texas, at least in the electricity market, is I'll call it a market-driven or market price-driven investment model, right? So the market delivers a price, and then private investors come in and figure out what they want to invest in. And I want to put this in the context of, I also know in Texas that when the prices go high, consumers save energy. They actually bring down their consumption because there is actually some transparency. I don't want to say total transparency, but there is some price transparency in Texas. And I'm just wondering, sort of blending this topic of grid resilience and how do we manage the grid. At the same time, so consumers and the saving energy is a major part of that systems thinking that most of you talk about. How do we think about making sure that going forward we protect the system that we have so that it provides resilient energy, at the same time take a big step, and hopefully not just mini steps, but big step in the energy transition? Like how do we make sure that we don't experience the backlash that we might see if someday there will be a big outage and people are pointing the fingers at wind and solar, I almost think that the clean energy industry cannot withstand that kind of backlash. Like, how do we jointly work toward protecting resilience and reliability at the same time make the transition? So I get to ask the question, the hard question, and you guys get to answer.
So is it to me?
Sure, you can start.
Yeah, so let me just start, but I'm very concerned about the backlash because we started to see it in Texas after the winter storm. We had a lot of state legislation passed, and it almost became, the discussion became renewables or not. And we got through the session, and we got through most of it in okay situation where it wasn't renewables or bad. But there is a real potential, in my opinion, having lived this, that if we have major problems throughout the U.S., that there will be a backlash that could set us back so many years. So I think we need to be very realistic in our planning. And I don't hear enough discussion about the grid reliability. What some have decided, I think what we need to do in Texas is be realistic because we've got this huge population growth that we're going to need gas for a while. And like I said in my remarks, it will be used a lot less. We've got to figure out how to incentivize people to build those plants, and they're expensive plants. And that's a difficult task to do because, as I showed you, they haven't been built in 15 years. So that's our challenge. And I know people don't like to hear natural gas, but it's our reality that we're living every day. And I think we have so much room to improve in the efficiencies, especially in Texas. We've got a lot of old buildings that are, we can do a lot there. And we're starting to. We've got a pilot program on virtual power plants with Tesla on their power walls. We're doing things, but we're learning. We're learning every day. And we've got to recognize, I believe we've got to recognize where we are today to improve for the future.
Peggy, you want to chime in? And then...
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered your question a little bit in the question, which is that we're one country with 50 states that operate like 50 different countries. They have different regulatory constructs. They have different priorities based on who's in charge and how all of that works. And so that is a reality that, that's just how our system is baked. I think that just means that we have to be far more diligent in every state, right? That you can't avoid one place because it's going to be harder than the other place, but that we have to be really clear on what our language is and our messaging is. And it is true that some places you can't say climate change, but you can say economic opportunity, right? And so it's not about not getting it done. It's about how do you use the language. We at the Alliance have an honorary board of advisors. It's bicameral and bipartisan. It's been this way for 47 years. I don't talk in some offices about climate change, but it does not mean that Republican members of my board do not support what we're doing at the Alliance in terms of energy efficiency. They are very, very interested in job growth and business growth and economic development. Those are all messages that they really like, and it helps them to get to the policies that you want. But if you say climate change, what they hear sometimes is anti-fossil. Sometimes they don't hear anti-fossil, right? Everyone kind of comes into it. So, my job is to be able to communicate as effectively, but very specifically to who I'm talking to. Very specifically to who I'm talking to because it's a national, international problem. And I would say the same challenges kind of exist when you talk about climate globally, right? Yes. And so when you think about the global south, and we talk about renewables and wind and solar, which would be wonderful there, you do get pushback, right, from developing nations who say, you all got to develop using gas and coal, and now you're telling us that we don't get to do that, right? So we do have to figure out how do we talk about what we're doing in a way that doesn't inhibit their economic growth. Yes. That doesn't necessarily mean build a coal plant, but it means that we have to use the kind of language that's going to be aligned with what people's interests are and not our interests.
Yes. Hoffer, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really important, these points about reliability. You know, back in February when we had that cold snap here, we had 21 code black events at hospitals in Massachusetts. And that means they can't accept more patients at that time because the cold snap caused pipes to burst. We had a fire at a hospital. We lost power in places. So these are serious issues. That said, there's a certain approach to these conversations that I think we really need to break through. So I'm thinking a lot about what you just said about how we have the conversations, because the reality is there isn't a choice anymore. And everybody needs to kind of understand that and begin to incorporate it into their thinking. There is going to be a transition cost, we know that, but it is whatever that cost is, it is a bargain compared to losing the life systems that support human civilization. So just think about with Storm Daniel, we just lost in one storm 1 full quarter of the annual agricultural production of Greece. It's gone. And we've seen decreases in other crops. We've seen a lot of human pain and suffering. We're headed towards over 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. So the conversations really have to be about, like, that's, you know, somebody sent me a card when I was in my 20s. It was like a person with a little backpack, and they were at a crossroads, and it was sort of like your path, no longer an option. And that's where we are with fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are no longer an option. So that's tricky because for a while we're going to be running these two systems next to each other while we're building more solar, while we're bringing on geothermal, while we're doing all those things. And we're going to be continuing to have to run the fossil generation until such time that we are positioned to move entirely off of it. So, you know, our position has been we're not going to support new fossil-fueled fired power plants here in Massachusetts, and we're not going to support new gas transmission pipelines. But if there's an issue, because you know, think about natural gas. What is it, MIT people? It's CH4, right? So it's pure methane, and we have huge. I mean, if you're watching what's happening with parts per million of methane in the atmosphere, there are unknown sources pumping huge amounts of methane into the atmosphere right now, not to mention the fact that we have a leaky distribution system and transmission system that causes us to lose a significant portion of all the methane. It never gets combusted. It gets lost in transmission to the points of combustion, so it's really inefficient. So when we are thinking about these things, we have to start moving towards those kinds of decisions. And if we've got a safety issue or reliability issue with a gas pipeline and distribution system, we're going to fix that because we need that, you know, to operate safely for the coming decades. But that's not where we're heading, and that's not where we're going to be putting new investment. And the last thing I did just want to point out is that this is a very supply-side conversation, and it really needs to be also a demand-side focused conversation, because reducing demand, using the IRA to go out there and get those energy efficient appliances and getting the heat pumps in that are going to provide cooling for places that are seeing, you know, very intense and life-threatening and unfortunately fatal heat domes like we saw over the summer. We need to get that stuff in so that we can begin to reduce the demand for power at the same time that we're going through this transition.
So I'm glad you brought up demand side and also the intricacies of systems thinking. So we think about both supply and the demand side of the equations. And I'm just curious, I mean, something dear to my heart, and I know you all think about this as well, is when we talk about the future, how long into the horizon do you think about planning the system, whether it's policies for planning or systems for planning in ERCOT, or educating the demand side and customers to provide more load flexibility into our systems? How do we sustain, and bringing back to the theme of this panel, how do we make sure that the policies and the planning actually get executed in a durable way so that there are no backlash? Like, how do we bring this forward in a sustainable way?
I mean, I think, and it's not easy. It's almost like how do you have a strong collaborative process, right? Because the people who are planning the system are not necessarily the people who are educating the consumers, and they're not the people who are making the policies, and we all have very different timelines. I mean, I think there are a lot of utilities who would tell you their struggle is that they have a particular timeline they use for planning, right? We have interconnection agreements, or we have integrated resource planning. It's a 20-year cycle. They're trying to plan for 2040, 2050 with technology that may or may not exist today, but they've got to buy stuff today to build for the future. And we have to consider that that is actually not an easy thing to do, right? That's actually very, very hard, and that's not utility companies being avoided. That's the reality of how their business operates. Policy makes the same, right? The biggest fear about the money, my biggest fear, quite frankly, about IRA money and greenhouse gas reduction fund money is that it won't be spelt well. And then what happens? We never, ever, ever see it again because now we've given somebody a reason to constantly complain about how people mismanage it. And yet that timeline for spending is so long, it's what, 7 to 10 years? Like, all you can really do is try to keep up with it as much as you possibly can. And I think bring in other people so that you do understand the entire system and how everything else is being impacted. That's not a good answer, but I actually don't know how else you would be able to kind of do it in the way that you've described.
Yeah. It's tough because, as you just said, you've got different technologies that have different timelines. I think a lot of it can be driven by some of the technologies that we saw out there on posters today. You know, that's got to go on. But when we're talking about the grid that will be needed for the future, that's a long-term process. We've built a decent amount of transmission in Texas. It's so hard in Texas. It's like an 18-year process in other states. I mean, and so which comes first, you know? And you're right, you have to plan the transmission needs not knowing what the technologies are going to be. And, you know, my view is you've just got to throw everything, all efforts to all pieces. And as I've said earlier, my concern is that not enough has been thrown at the grid across the U.S. And that's maybe some of the hardest part.
Yeah, I definitely think.
And just add one more thing. We haven't talked about how hard it is to change human behavior. Which is like a big
whole other panel.
Yeah, but when we talk about efficiency and conservation, we're talking about our own human behavior, right? How do we make each other make different types of choices about what we invest in? If my furnace is dying, maybe I'll make an investment in a heat pump if I can afford it, and I can find someone who knows how to install it and who can sell it to me, and I don't need duct work. And like, it's actually not as simple as we want it to be. And so changing human behavior is hard. I will tell you, in my house, my husband and I have an argument every stinking night about the dishwasher. I am a run the dishwasher. Stop washing dishes and running water all over the place. We have enough dishes for 3 weeks. Put the dishes in the dishwasher and run it. I cannot get him to change that behavior. We've been together 25 years. He will not do it, right? But I mean, I'm just saying, like, how much time do we spend getting kids to turn out the lights? So we do have to account for the fact that part of this is changing our own behavior. That is something that we collectively can effectuate. If we're all doing it, we're all talking about it, we're all finding opportunities to teach other people about it, how is it not that difficult, and how are we able to live with some discomfort, right? I'm on demand response with my utility company, and it was 90 degrees 2 weeks ago, and I was shut down, and I could not override it, and I was angry, because I'm menopausal, and it was 88 degrees in my house. And I couldn't do anything about it, right? But I'm running around telling people that there will be no discomfort if you install efficiency. Right. Your quality of life will remain the same, right? So there is a bit of this that we all have to kind of do and talk about ourselves if we believe it and we're trying. And the pace of change is going to be slow.
Yes.
Sorry.
I personally think we need to make a lot of it invisible to the consumer, and I think we need to listen to the consumer. People don't want to have to worry. We've done a lot of conservation notices the last 2 years in Texas, and the public has responded, but there's a level that they're going to quit responding. So you've got, they can do something when they sign up for their plans where they can say, okay, this is the temperature I can manage. And then they get money back, or, and then they don't have to think about it again. I think that's where ideally we need to get. And I actually think we can do some of that stuff fairly quickly.
Melissa, would you like to have the last word before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I really agree with this point about it being as frictionless as possible. We're certainly looking at mass saves to try to transition that a little bit so it's more like a one-stop shop and it's easier for people to come in. It shouldn't matter, if it's, thermal or electric efficiency for your house. You should be able to just come in and somebody can tell you what you need to do to electrify and to help finance that and get that going for you. That's what Efficiency Vermont does. It's what Efficiency Maine does. Efficiency Vermont, I think 60% of the homes in Vermont right now, residential, have heat pumps installed. So the other thing I wanted to say is this point about vision of what is possible, talking to people about, not just what we face if we don't take these steps, but what's possible and how it's better in many ways than what we already have now. I mean, there are huge health co-benefits that come with these changes that we're talking about. There are huge equity benefits if we do it right. This could actually be a lot better because what we have right now isn't really working very well for many, many people. So I think getting people invested in the positive side as well as trying to help them understand that there really is no alternative is good. And I was just thinking about, the Obama administration and era. That was, at that time, the largest single investment in clean energy. It was something like $90 billion. And over that time, we brought the price of solar down 89%. So wow, we can totally do that. And we can keep doing that, and we can keep building the workforce that's going to create actually good jobs for people to do this stuff. So it's very, very possible. And I'll just leave you with this thought. When you think about IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, CHIPS Act, all that stuff together, like Goldman and RMI and the folks who've analyzed that, it gives us something like 8 to 30% of the total estimated cost of national decarbonization. The reason why it's such a big spread is because there are questions about how much private sector money that stuff will draw, all right? So that means that even a humanities major can tell that that's like 70 to 90% of the total cost of decarbonization is going to be picked up by states and other actors. So we really have to start to think, and I will just say it out loud here, about socializing some of these costs, because you're not going to be able to put it all on the backs of the ratepayers. You're just not. We have long-standing disinvestment in our local grid, our distribution utility grids, and in our transmission grids. And that's an unfortunate state of affairs, but that's where we are, and we got to get that stuff up and running quickly and well, and that's probably going to require some type of carbon pricing in whatever form we want to call it, inflation reduction carbon pricing. But however we want to talk about it, that is, something that people can hear. We're going to need to do that, and it will be very, very worth the price.
Well, join me in thanking this great panel, and thank you